I'm Martha McCallum, and this is day 18, folks, of the first 100, and it's another busy one. Just within the last hour, the Trump Justice Department challenging a federal judge who would put a hold on the president's plan to temporarily suspend immigration from 7 countries in the Middle East. In moments, Judge Andrew Napolitano will talk with us about President Trump's case and whether or not it holds up in court. Then we'll be joined by Special Assistant to the President, Boris Epshteyn. He will give us the White House reaction, and we'll talk about the priorities with this vetting issue and whether or not another one of President Trump's biggest campaign promises, tax reform, should have come first. But let's go first to Chief White House Correspondent John Roberts, who joins us at the White House. Good evening, John.
Martha, good evening to you. At 5:52 p.m. Eastern Time, the White House filed its brief to reinstate the extreme vetting executive order to lift the temporary restraining order that was placed on it by a Seattle federal district judge, James Robart, on Friday night. In the 15-page briefing, the Department of Justice, which prepared the brief, argues that the president has, quote, the express statutory authority to suspend entry of any class of aliens to protect the national interest, and that the ban is, quote, to permit an orderly review and revision of screening procedures to ensure that adequate standards are in place to protect against terrorist attacks. In other words, this is temporary. The brief also argues that established case law has determined that states have no standing to bring suit, saying, quote, a state lacks authority to sue as the representative of its citizens to protect them from the operation of federal law. The White House and the Department of Justice contend that the district judge's order was both incorrect and far too sweeping, insisting that it would actually take away the president's right to bar citizens of a country that the United States was at war with. They also argue that third-party aliens have no constitutional right to enter the country, nor does the U.S. provide any form of judicial review for a denied visa. The White House, though, is facing a barrage of opponents in its attempt to reinstate the ban. The attorneys general of 16 states have joined the fight. Major corporations like Apple, Microsoft, Google, Uber, and eBay are all against the president, as is Tesla and SpaceX, headed up by Elon Musk, who's actually on the president's business advisory board. But it was clear from his visit to MacDill Air Force Base today in Tampa, headquarters of CENTCOM, which really is the nerve center for the fight against terrorism, that part of the military, at least, is with him.
We need strong programs so that people that love us and want to love our country and will end up loving our country are allowed in, not people that want to destroy us and destroy our country.
A lot of spontaneous cheers and applause there. Martha, here's something that perhaps you and the judge can chew over here. The district judge, in making his ruling, said that no one from any of the 7 named countries in the executive order had ever been arrested for an act of terrorism, or even just arrested, which is patently false. The guy that ran into all of those folks at Ohio State University was a refugee from Somalia. And there are plenty of others as well. The legal record there is clear. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, by the way, has scheduled an hour of oral arguments to take place tomorrow evening at 6 o'clock. So I would imagine, and the judge would probably know better, Martha, that we won't get a ruling on this until Wednesday at the earliest. Back to you.
John, thank you very much. So here now is Judge Andrew Napolitano, Fox News senior judicial analyst. Judge, what's going on here?
Wow. We have a federal district court judge in Seattle who basically second-guessed the president on the wisdom and propriety of the president's executive order, and that is absolutely not the job of federal judges in our society. The law on which President Trump relied is crystal clear, a 1952 statute which says, just as John Roberts read from the government's brief, that the president of the United States has the authority to suspend any immigration of an individual or a group or a class of people for public health, public safety, or national security. It's not the president and the courts. It's not the president and the Congress. It's the president alone.
But those who are opposing him are saying that they are paying more attention to the 1965 law, which says that the president or the country can't discriminate against immigrants based on race, nationality, or place of birth.
Correct. So the president can discriminate on the basis of geography if he makes a finding that people from a geographical area are more likely than not to contain people to harm us.
Which is probably what President Obama used when he did it, right?
Correct. And the president can always discriminate for a short period of time in order to put in place more stringent vetting procedures where people will be identified and examined on an individual rather than on a group basis, which is basically what President Trump said in that executive order.
So tomorrow night we're going to hear an hour of argument on this.
Yes.
And then when do you expect we'll get a decision? And does it go to the Supreme Court?
I think we'll get a decision on Wednesday because this is a court that is required to write its decisions. And I think they know that the losing side is going to appeal to the Supreme Court. My view is the president is so much in the right. The states are so much in the wrong, they don't even have the standing to sue, meaning they can only sue if they've been harmed, and they haven't. They are claiming that people that live in those states are harmed, and it's the obligation of those alleging harm to sue. But if the Justice Department wins and the states of Washington and Minnesota appeal to the Supreme Court, I don't think the Supreme Court will hear it. But if the states win and the Justice Department appeals to the Supreme Court, I think the Supreme Court will hear it because the Supreme Court is interested in the orderly administration of governmental function. And this is profoundly disorderly for a single federal judge to stop the president from examining people with more care as they enter the country.
All right. Judge, thank you.
You're welcome.
And if we get more breaking news on this, we'll come back to you. Thank you very much.
You
Good
got
to
it.
see you tonight. So Boris Epshteyn is a special assistant to the president. Boris, good evening to you. Good to see you.
Martha.
So you have been hearing all of this back and forth. And, you know, one of the questions in my mind is in terms of White House strategy. You know, so here you are, you've got something that may go to the Supreme Court, which would probably split on a 4-4 decision right now. And then you have the people who oppose this administration wanting to drag their heels on Judge Gorsuch because they don't want to put him in and lose this decision, even if it's months from now.
Well, Martha, let's separate these 2 points. First of all, on this, the executive order is completely lawful. The hearing tomorrow, the oral arguments tomorrow are on a procedural matter. The matter is, can this judge in Seattle stay this executive order? Could this temporary restraining order be in place? Now, what's going to happen is the Ninth Circuit will decide one way or another, and if the Ninth Circuit decides against somehow the administration, which it should not, the administration should prevail on the merits. It will not. It will then just go back to the district court. This is an emergency appeal with the Ninth Circuit to stay the temporary restraining order. I know that's a lot of legalese, but the bottom line here is that the next step here is in no way the Supreme Court. The next step is to hear the full case on the merits, and the full issue on the merits, just as happened in the Massachusetts District Court. We are very confident that the White House, the administration, and therefore the American people will prevail.
So you're saying that you believe that there's a good chance that this ends tomorrow in your favor?
Absolutely. It will end tomorrow in the administration's favor. And if for some reason it does not, it will end in the administration's favor on the merits, just as it did in the Massachusetts District Court.
All right. I want to play a soundbite from Bill O'Reilly's interview with President Trump with regard to tax reform. Here's what he said.
2017, can Americans expect a tax cut?
I think so, yes. And I think before the end of the year, I would like to say yes.
All right. So that sort of pricked up the ears of a lot of people. And they said, wait a minute. We were promised tax reform early. The market's been, going great guns based on growth that is going to, come to the bottom line of companies because of tax cuts and all of this stuff. And now we're hearing maybe that will happen in the spring, which means it wouldn't be voted on until the fall. And, a lot of businesses out there are wondering what that means for them.
Well, let's not take that one statement out of context. It's obvious that this president has worked very hard throughout the transition and the first 2+ weeks of the administration to fulfill campaign promises. And he just said in that statement that he is going to be working very hard to put in tax relief this year.
All right. Would that be retroactive to January of 2017?
We'll be putting that information out there, Martha, in terms of the specifics on the tax relief. But this president is fully set on making sure that Americans are not burdened by the overarching and really too heavy taxes that have been put in place by the Democrats, and going back to what was talked about during the campaign, is simpler tax brackets for individuals and a lower corporate tax bracket.
All right, so no commitment on whether that would be retroactive, correct?
We'll be putting that information out there as part of a broader proposal, broader legislation.
So a lot of people look at everything that's going on in the incredibly busy 18 days, and I know that you all see that as progress and that you want to be firing on all cylinders, which I think a lot of people get. But you look at what's going on now and whether or not this vetting issue could go up to the Supreme Court. You have Judge Gorsuch, who you very much want to get confirmed. And some people say they're doing too much at once. They need to focus on things like tax reform and not be getting themselves caught up in the courts on this extreme vetting issue at this point. What do you say?
Well, the obstruction is from the left, including the leftist judge that was actually, as John Roberts said, patently wrong on the fact that folks in these countries have been arrested on extremism and potential terrorism in this country. That's obstructions from the left. Obstructions from the left is not allowing for nominees of the president for cabinet seats to be confirmed, and any sort of discussion of not confirming Judge Gorsuch is just that, obstructions. He's a true judge's judge, a perfect pick to be the 9th justice in the Supreme Court. So just because the left tries to obstruct does not mean that this president and our administration are going to somehow stop. We will continue going full speed ahead for the American people, because that's why President Trump was elected on November 8th.
Boris Epshteyn, thank you very much. Good to have you here tonight.
Thanks so much.
So we will also go live to Seattle a little bit later, where Dan Springer is standing by with any new information that comes out of the judges in the Ninth Circuit as they hear arguments on the president's travel restrictions. Plus, President Trump makes new remarks about Vladimir Putin that have stunned some on the left and on the right. So we're going to have a former Trump campaign advisor and a former Obama administration official who will go head to head on that. Plus, new drama over the Republicans' promise to do away with Obamacare. Chris Stirewalt and Mo Elleithee have the inside scoop from Capitol Hill when we come back.
Can Americans in 2017 expect a new health care plan rolled out by the Trump administration this year?
Developing tonight, we're less than an hour away from a newsmaking sit-down between our own Bill O'Reilly and President Trump. The first part of this interview sent shockwaves through Washington when Bill O'Reilly asked the president about his relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Do you respect Putin?
I do respect him.
Do you? Why?
Well, I respect a lot of people, but that doesn't mean I'm going to get along with him. He's a leader of his country. I say it's better to get along with Russia than not. And if Russia helps us in the fight against ISIS, which is a major fight, and Islamic terrorism all over the world,
right.
Major fight, that's a good thing. Will I get along with him? I have no idea. It's very
He's a
possible
killer,
I
though.
won't.
Putin's a killer.
A lot of killers. We got a lot of killers. Why, you think our country's so innocent? You think our country's so innocent?
I don't know of any government leaders that are killers in America.
Well, take a look at what we've done too. We've made a lot of mistakes. I've been against the war in Iraq from the beginning.
Yeah, mistakes are different than...
A lot of mistakes, okay, but a lot of people were killed. So a lot of killers around, believe me.
That comment got a lot of attention today. Joining me now, Pete Hoekstra, former House Intel Committee Chairman and former Trump campaign National Security Advisor, and Marie Harf, a former spokesperson for the Obama State Department and a Fox News contributor. Welcome to both of you. Good to have you here tonight. Pete, let me start with you on this. Your reaction to that statement by President Trump.
Well, I'm actually kind of surprised by the question or the commenting by Bill O'Reilly saying, well, Putin's a killer. We know that. But America has done business with very bad people for an extended period of time. When I was on the Intelligence Committee, I met with Putin, I met with Gaddafi, I met with Assad, Karimov in Uzbekistan. And in some way, at least the last three, Gaddafi, Assad, and Karimov, helped us achieve our national security interest. Under the Obama administration, they dealt with some very, very ugly groups and individuals, dealing with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt to move our agenda forward.
But that's not what he said. He didn't say that. He said, he didn't say, well, we've dealt with a lot of bad actors before, and sometimes that's what you have to do. He said, we're not so innocent either. That's what got people upset. He was, making an equivalency. He may have been referring to our relation. Yeah, he may have been referring to our relationship with these kinds of individuals, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group in Libya, the February 17 Martyrs Brigade in Libya, and who knows who we armed and equipped in Syria to overthrow Assad. These are some very ugly groups, and the groups in Libya, there's a lot of indications that the groups we partnered with in Libya to overthrow Gaddafi are actually some of the same people who engaged with killing our ambassador and 3 other Americans in Benghazi. Marie, would you agree with what Pete Hoekstra is saying?
No, and I think there are 2 problems here with what Donald Trump said. First, he did draw an equivalency. If Barack Obama had said what Donald Trump said, I can only imagine the outrage that people like Congressman Hoekstra and other Republicans would have had. That's not American exceptionalism as I know it. And he also dismissed Putin's gross human rights violations, including killing activists, journalists. It really was an extraordinary statement, and I don't think you can compare it to working with the Muslim Brotherhood or groups in Libya. I think that's a false comparison.
So let's go back to why he may have said it. And I'm curious about the strategy that the Trump administration has on this, and whether or not, Pete, they believe that Russia could help us with ISIS. And I also wonder, because he made very negative comments about Iran, if he's trying to drive a wedge between Russia and Iran, to cozy up to them to some extent and to push and to isolate Iran. Is that possible?
Oh, it's very, very possible. Actually, and President Obama made some of the same types of statements where he said America's done some, hasn't always been right. We've made mistakes and those kinds of things. But I think you're exactly right. For Donald Trump, eliminating and minimizing the threat of ISIS is tops on his priority list, and he recognizes with the growth of influence that Russia has had in the Middle East over the last number of years, both in terms of their effectiveness in Syria and other places in the Middle East, and their role that they play with Iran, that if we are going to address both of those issues, somehow we have to see if there's a way that we can build a relationship with Russia.
Marie, is that what he's trying to do? Is he trying to isolate Iran and sort of get on the same side with Russia when it comes to ISIS?
I think that's giving his strategy a little more credit than I think is actually there. I have seen no organized strategic thinking coming out of this White House on the Middle East. And look, there are ways to work with Russia that don't include talking down America, making a moral equivalency between Putin and the United States, and dismissing when Putin kills political opponents. There's ways to do it that don't add up to what Donald Trump said.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Very interesting. Thank you to you both. Good to have you here tonight.
Great. Thank you.
So coming up at 8 o'clock on the O'Reilly Factor, the next part of O'Reilly's exclusive interview with President Trump. Here's a preview.
You know what was fascinating? To watch you at the inauguration with Barack Obama. You gave a speech, but your speech excoriated him. You basically took his administration apart, and he's sitting 5 feet away from you.
See, I'm an honest person. The country has very, very deep-seated problems. We have to do something about it. And if you noticed, when I finished my speech, I turned around, shook his hand.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
And he was very gracious and smiling.
I don't know if he was happy with that speech.
I don't know, but he seemed to be.
More to come. Full interview, 8 o'clock on the O'Reilly Factor. Still ahead right here, we are learning more about what the Ninth Circuit is planning to do tomorrow with the president's order restricting travel to some Mideast countries, plus new fallout next on the plan to repeal Obamacare. How is that going in Washington? Chris Darwalt and Mo Alithi weigh in just ahead. Plus, President Trump visits Central Command headquarters today. It was quite an event. He delivers a new promise on the war against ISIS.
We will defeat radical Islamic terrorism, and we will not allow it to take root in our country. We're not going to allow it.
Breaking tonight, President Trump has arrived back at the White House after his first visit to United States Central Command headquarters as Commander-in-Chief. When he was there, he met with enlisted personnel over lunch before an intense speech to service members, vowing to outfit the military with new and improved resources and pledging victory against ISIS. Watch.
We're up against an enemy that celebrates death and totally worships destruction. You've seen that. ISIS is on a campaign of genocide, committing atrocities across the world. To these forces of death and destruction, America and its allies will defeat you. We will defeat them.
Strong words from the president. General Jack Keane is chairman of the Institute for Study of War and a Fox News military analyst. General, welcome. Good to see you here tonight.
Yeah, good to be here, Martha.
So what did today signal in terms of what changes in the fight against ISIS?
Well, first of all, it's just great that he visited these two commands. I mean, for our viewers to understand, these are the Central Command and Special Operations Command. These are the two commands that have largely had the burden of fighting the 9/11 wars for the last 15, 16 years. So their troops are the ones that have done all of the fighting largely, and certainly all of the dying. And I know that they appreciated very much the Commander-in-Chief coming here after being in office in 2 weeks. He has said that he wants a comprehensive strategy from his general officers. He's going to get it. It'll come from Central Command. And certainly, I know for a fact that they've been looking at options for some time. They knew there would be a new commander-in-chief, whether Democrat or Republican, they had no idea. But they knew they would have to present some options for change from what is currently being executed. So I think what we'll see is what the president wants. He's been very clear, urgency. We're going to get this thing done. We're going to get it done quick. And he's willing to put the resources on it to get it done. So I think that'll be a change from what we've done in the past.
You touch on something that is so important, and you heard the cheers in the room. They are feeling as if someone is listening to them, and that the mission that they have been given long ago, that in many ways people believe they have been stymied. And you look at the fact that you had 3 secretaries of defense under President Obama who left that position and criticized him openly in books that they wrote, saying that he wasn't listening to the military and that he wasn't doing what needed to be done to defeat ISIS. So this is a whole new ball game, is it not?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And they know that. Listen, the career force that's in both of those commands, as opposed to the troops that come in and spend 2, 3, 4 years with us, and we certainly welcome the sacrifice that they're making. But that career force has been back to Iraq and Afghanistan multiple times over these last 15 and 16 years. They watched us pull away from Iraq and squander the victory that they had achieved. And we are now in a situation in Afghanistan where the war is not winnable. And these come as a result of policy decisions made by the previous administration. And these troops understand that clearly.
So does that mean we go back in bigger numbers? What does a time frame look like on this?
Well, for Afghanistan, that's a different policy change. We'll talk about that another time. But when it comes to ISIS, they'll put options on the table to increase the resources that we're providing to help the Iraqis be successful. That probably will not require a lot of new troops on our part. For the war in Syria, we do not have a ground force that's capable. So they're going to have to put options on the table, Arab coalition, regional forces, and possibly U.S. direct combat forces, or just increase what we're doing now. They'll show them all of those options, and they'll let them see what the risks are associated with it. Now, Martha, we have never done this before. Obama has never seen anything like that.
All right. General Keane, more to come on that. Thank you very much, sir. Good to see you.
Okay. Take care, Martha.
Breaking tonight, we have just learned that at this exact hour tomorrow night, a federal appeals court will hear arguments over whether or not to reinstate President Trump's immigration executive order. Correspondent Dan Springer gets a closer look at what is going on in Seattle and what we can expect tomorrow. Hi, Dan.
Yeah, hi, Martha. Things are moving quickly. About 90 minutes ago, the Trump administration made its case, issuing in a legal brief its argument as to why this federal court judge in Seattle, in their opinion, was way off base in issuing that temporary restraining order late Friday afternoon. It wrote in part, the exclusion of aliens is also a fundamental act of sovereignty inherent in the executive power to control the foreign affairs of the nation. Judge James Robart seemed to side with the state of Washington, which argued that President Trump's extreme vetting executive order was motivated by religious discrimination, not a desire to keep Americans safe. At one point, he even incorrectly said that not a single person from the 7 mostly Muslim countries had been arrested on terrorism charges since 9/11. Well, the Associated Press did a fact check and came up with at least 2 examples of refugees from Iraq who were arrested in the U.S. while plotting attacks. So now the issue goes to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. A 3-judge panel will hear arguments by phone tomorrow at 3 o'clock Pacific time. They are spread out all over the country. The lawyers for each side will have 30 minutes apiece. Now, 2 of the 3 judges were nominated by Democrats. William Canby was picked by President Carter in 1980. Michelle Friedman was just selected by President Obama. Richard Clifton was nominated by President George W. Bush and confirmed in 2002. Now, if the panel upholds the temporary restraining order, the Trump administration will almost certainly appeal. It could try a larger 11-judge panel of the Ninth Circuit Court or go straight to the Supreme Court, where Justice Anthony Kennedy would decide whether or not to issue a stay and then let the full court weigh in. Now, it would take 5 justices to overturn the decision of the appeals court if it's a 4-4 tie, and right now we have a 4-4 split between conservatives and liberals on the court. If it's a 4-4 split, the lower court's decision would be upheld.
Right. And what does this mean for Judge Neil Gorsuch is a big question tonight. Dan, thank you very much. So we are tracking developing news tonight on Obamacare and reports that the Republican plans to repeal and replace may be running into a little bit of trouble. Trace Gallagher has more on that. Trace?
Martha, there does appear to be a bit of a stalemate inside the Republican Party. On the one side, you have those who want Obamacare repealed immediately. In fact, GOP Congressman Jim Jordan of Ohio and Mark Meadows of North Carolina say the very same Affordable Care Act repeal bill that passed the House back in 2015 and also passed the Senate, but was vetoed by the president. President Obama should be voted on again and sent to President Trump's desk ASAP. But Tennessee Senator Lamar Alexander, who chairs the Senate Health Committee, clearly prefers a step-by-step approach, saying he'd like to see lawmakers come up with fixes to the current insurance markets before repealing parts of the law, which is similar to the timeline President Trump laid out during his interview with Bill O'Reilly. Watch.
In the process, and maybe it'll take till sometime into next year, but we are certainly going to be in the process. Very complicated. Obamacare is a disaster. You have to remember, Obamacare doesn't work. So we are putting in a wonderful plan. It's statutorily, it takes a while to get.
Even House Speaker Paul Ryan, who believes Obamacare is collapsing under its own weight and is currently crafting a bill that would unravel big chunks of the health care law. He's getting pressure, though, to make sure the repeal legislation includes replacement measures because several GOP lawmakers in the House and Senate, like Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, have vowed not to allow millions of people to suddenly lose coverage. Experts say the biggest problem with the Affordable Care Act is that not enough young and healthy people signed up to offset the costs of older and sicker people. Now the GOP has to remedy that with a plan the whole party can apparently rally around. Martha.
Thank you, Trace. Joining us on this, Chris Direwalt, Fox News politics editor, and Mo Alithi, former spokesman for the DNC and a Fox News contributor. Gentlemen, welcome. Good to have you both here.
Howdy, man.
So, it's a point worth looking at. I mean, the Republicans have said for a year that they have 50 plans to replace this thing, Chris, and now it comes time to do it, and they seem to be at odds.
They've been cracking walnuts on this sucker since 2009. And now they get down to go time, and they're not ready to go. Part of it is that whatever happens, everybody says they don't want any disruption. There'll be no disruption. And the Democrats felt the same way when President Obama was trying to get the original put in. Well, there's going to be disruption. We remember all the people who lost their plans, the doctors and all of that stuff. There is inherent disruption in this. Right now, Republicans are arguing, before they talk about the plan, what they're really arguing about is when to pay that political cost. There is a political cost attendant to this. It has to do with disappointing members of your base. It has to do with frustrating people in the middle. When do you do it and how? And until they get done with that, they're not going to be able to settle on a plan.
So in the meantime, Mo, you have people whose premiums have skyrocketed, and I think we have a map that shows all of the states, 39 of them, have higher premiums. Plus, you've got business owners all across the country who believe that this is going to, sort of be alleviated for them to some extent, and that really weighs into the business decisions that they make as well.
Well, I mean, I think Chris is absolutely right. There's a political cost here. The base of the Republican Party demands this. They expect it. They want full repeal come hell or high water. Doesn't matter what else happens. And there are a lot of members of Congress that are feeling that pressure. But at the same time, there is a very real human cost if they were to move forward with repeal without a replacement. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office is estimating tens of millions of people would lose their coverage, and premiums would double from where they are now in a matter of years if they repeal without a replacement. And Chris is right. These guys have had 7 years to work on this. They've had over 50 votes in the House to repeal it. How come they don't have their acts together now? You would think that they would walk into office. This is the moment they've been waiting for, full control of the government. You think they would walk into office with their replacement plan ready to go. Yeah. I think they're realizing that
Chris,
governing is harder than
there's
campaigning.
So many discussions right now, Mo, about priorities, in this administration and the things that they're doing first. As we talked about before, tax reform is something that people really want to see. Obamacare is something they thought they were going to have ready to roll. And, you can't forget the people who don't like the situation as it is. I know, a lot of people feel like they've got something better out of Obamacare, but others want this monkey off their back and quickly.
Sure, and there's only so many day ones, right? We've heard a lot about day one. On day one, I'll do this. On day one, we'll do that. Well, in the proverbial day one, you can really only do one thing at a time. And the president wants to go directly to tax change. He wants to go to tax cuts, and he wants to go to this $1 trillion infrastructure spending plan. He wants to juice the economy. He wants to do what other large economies in the world have done and pour gas on the fire to try to get the U.S. economy roaring. So he wants to do that. But you can't do that if you're doing Obamacare first. So it's a matter of choosing, because Congress can only process so much at a time.
Yeah, but many would say that does put gas on the fire of the economy. If you deal with Obamacare up front and you give people relief from these premium hikes, and you figure out a way to, have cross-state environment where people can get, choosing their plan in a better way, that will be a good signal to business, no?
So Ryan and Trump are dancing, and Ryan is trying to encourage Trump to, you just choose, Mr. President. You got to choose. Do you want to deal with Obamacare first, or do you want to do this first? Not everything can go first. And as you say, Ryan obviously said, I'm perfectly happy. You want to do Obamacare first? Let's do that. You want to do the taxes first? We can do that. But it's got to be one or the other. You can't do it all concurrently.
All right, Mo, Chris, thank you very much.
And
Got to leave it there. Thank you very much. So, fight they will. That was Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren. And now a new poll suggesting that she may have a fight on her hands indeed. As one of the most controversial liberal senators in Congress, a survey shows 46% of Massachusetts voters believe that she should not be reelected. And remember, this is a woman who's often mentioned as a 2020 presidential candidate. So what is she up against here? David Wohl is an attorney, and Jessica Charlov, Democratic pollster and senior research director at Bustle.com. Good to see you both tonight.
Hi, Martha.
It's, you hear about, putting people back to work, this bold progressive agenda, and you look at what we just saw happen in the November election, and you have to wonder, what she's talking about, David.
Yeah, I mean, look, Ms. Warren is a far-left senator who's been far more obsessed with denigrating and insulting our great president, Mr. Trump, than she has serving the needs of her constituents. And remember, Martha, the voters in Massachusetts are a fickle bunch. I mean, in 2010, they put GOP Senator Scott Brown in office. They're also great sports fans, as we know from last night, Tom Brady winning his 5th Super Bowl, and he's a great friend of Mr. Trump. And Warren's number one opponent may be next year Curt Schilling, who's a former Red Sox great pitcher. That's going to be a big battle, so she needs to look out what she's doing and focus more on her constituents than trying to tear down our new president.
All right, so the Super Bowl is apparently a bad sign as well for Elizabeth Warren. Jessica, what do you think?
I'm not sure about the sports angle here, but I think that actually what Elizabeth Warren is talking about is critical to Democrat success, not only her own, but for us in 2020. This is something that Joe Biden's been out there talking about, Bernie Sanders as well, that essentially Democrats have ignored for the last few decades how hard it's been for the middle class. And that is why many white working class and middle class voters went with Donald Trump in this election. So I actually salute her for the themes.
But Jessica, there's a divide, it seems, when you look at the election process to head the DNC. I mean, you have a progressive side of that, and then you have the establishment side,
exactly.
The Joe Bidens and the Hillary Clintons. So they're in a real struggle right now because they, let's face it, they had a very difficult election season in November.
We absolutely did. I'm still, a little upset about it, obviously, but I'm powering through. And yes, we are deeply divided. Bernie Sanders versus Hillary Clinton, that will go on for a long time. We need to find a unity message, obviously, and a unity candidate. I'm concerned that neither Tom Perez or Keith Ellison is that candidate. And we may need to look further, maybe to the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, a veteran and someone who I think is very exciting for us. We also need to look at younger candidates, which is why I find it so interesting that PPP polling just showed that our top 3 2020 candidates are Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, and Elizabeth Warren.
Here's the problem.
Well, they've been down that road before. David?
If she doesn't win in 2018, the Senate race, she's not going to be a realistic candidate for 2020 for the Democrat nominee for president.
Do you really think that 2 years out,
that's the big problem she has.
That she's
and
on
number
the
two,
cusp of losing?
remember something, guys. Hold on. Remember what happened to Bernie Sanders, the far-left candidate, last year before he could be nominated. The DNC cannibalized him. They destroyed him. Right. They tore apart his campaign. He didn't even know about it. And she's cut from the same cloth as Bernie. So that's going to be a big problem for her as well.
If you think that Bernie Sanders did not lose the primary because of what the DNC did to him.
Well,
absolutely.
The tale will be told. Thank you, guys. I'm Martha McCallum. We will see you back here at 7 p.m. tomorrow night, where we will have big news from the West Coast on the travel ban decision for the Trump administration. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night, everybody. Bill O'Reilly coming up with the Trump interview right after this.